Tree of Butterflies because it is an imaginative work of fiction. However, the novella is grounded in historical fact. Midoruma writes in his numerous essays that 130 comfort stations existed in Okinawa, one of which was in Nakijing, his home village. 1,000 Korean women were brought to Okinawa to serve along with 500 women from Tsuji, the pleasure quarters in Naha, which had been razed to the ground on October 10th, 1944. He even acknowledges his own family's complicity by telling readers his grandfather, acting chief of police, together with the comfort station's owner, negotiated with Americans to reopen the establishment in Nakijing to serve American soldiers in the post-war. Today, although the remarkable cornerstone of peace in Mabuni, Okinawa, records the names of battle's victims, regardless of nationality, not a single Korean sex slave's name is inscribed. To give you some idea of the context in which Midoruma wrote The Tree of Butterflies, I would like to introduce one of the controversies that arose shortly before publication. And this was something that centered on proposed changes for Okinawa's new prefectural peace memorial museum, which opened in April 2000. In short, committee members who had since 1996 drawn up guidelines for the museum's designs and exhibit captions were treated to a shock when they opened the papers in August and saw that the museum's content had been changed without the committee's knowledge. The governor's defeat, Inamine's defeat of Ota Masahide, then ushered in a far more conservative administration, which clearly sought to tone down what it perceived as inflammatory content in the museum's exhibits. This whitewashing of material included the removal of a gun from a proposed exhibit on the daily lives of civilian refugees. The display was to have portrayed a Japanese soldier commanding a mother at gunpoint to stifle her child's cries. Also airbrushed out of the designs was a Japanese soldier who was to appear in a cave scene in which he handed an injured soldier cyanide-laced milk. Further changes were made in terminology. Sacrifice replaced massacre, war of attrition replaced sacrifice stone strategy, and Asia-Pacific War replaced the 15 Years' War. So this was the context in which Midoruma writes The Tree of Butterflies, and I thought that the best way to show you how he does this inscription of stories that have not entered national or local government histories is by reading, in my remaining time, some extended passages from Tree of Butterflies. So this is from the perspective of Goze, the Okinawan comfort woman that Midoruma depicts. The thick darkness was suffocating, as if she were buried in mud. Someone was trying to blow air into Goze's deflated lungs. But when she remembered Ishino's festering mouth, nausea overwhelmed her, and she shook her head in protest. Nearby, she heard the groans of the Korean woman. Was she being beaten or raped? The rotten soldiers had run away to a cave as deep into the mountains, away from the Americans' attacks, without putting up a fight, and had the nerve to keep using us women. Although in the beginning there were 4 Korean women who'd been taken from the comfort station into the mountains, 1 had disappeared along the way, and 2, hit in the neck and stomach by shell fragments during the American naval shelling, died. Were the other Okinawan and mainland girls at the inn being mobilized with another unit? Ishino had ordered only Goze to be brought with his unit. Days had passed since she had begun mobilizing with a dozen soldiers in the mountains in the southern part of the village. How she was made to suffer by those damn soldiers. They were forbidden to speak. Goze felt around in the dark to find the Korean woman. They warmed each other in the chill of the cave. Water had begun to soak through the stone walls, and even the softer places to sit had become sludge, further aggravating the pain in their abdomens. The next time they mobilized, she probably wouldn't be able to walk, she thought. The Korean woman shivered and clung to Gose. She was still a girl of 17 or 18. Gose pitied this girl, whose name she did not even know, called only P. Knowing that the girl must be in even greater pain than herself, Gose stroked her back and arms. Her hatred grew against the soldiers who hid in the caves without even putting up a fight. The soldiers boasted that they would wait in the mountains for the Americans to come and counterattack, but they only returned fire for maybe a week after the Americans had landed. Two soldiers with guns in their hands turned toward the entrance and climbed up the rocks. Shosei and the soldiers bracing his body on either side followed behind. Ishino with his sword and Yonamine climbing up last, speaking in low voices. Ishino came for her, beating her when she resisted. He hurled against her. He smelled blood, Shosei's blood. Refusing the help of the Korean woman who came to her, Gose lay face down in the mud. She did not move. If only she would melt away into the mud and darkness. Her entire body was chilled to the core. Only the dull pain in her groin told her she was still alive. How many days did she lie there that way? The Korean woman came to her, caressing her hair and forehead. The woman grasped her hand and spoke to her. Gose didn't have the strength to listen. It was only much later that she regretted having parted from her without ever learning the woman's name. To conclude, I hope you've gotten a taste of Midorima's Tree of Butterflies. It powerfully shows us the fallacy of a uniformity of victimhood of Okinawans brutalized by the Japanese military. What is even worse than the grim depiction readers get of Gose, an Okinawan comfort woman, doubly discriminated against by Japanese and American men, is the unnamed Korean comfort women who worked alongside Gose.
Thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts today. Thank you everyone who came from far or from Seattle to join us this wonderful time. Since time is limited and I would just like to point out two things using my expertise in historical approaches to colonial subjectivities. So the first part I would like to share was that colonial subjectivity is a very complicated term, and it's, since the film director and other historical revisionists were arguing that these comfort women were well-paid prostitutes who willingly volunteered to go to these comfort stations, I had to use my thoughts or the researches I have done to understand that kind of complexity of colonial subjectivity, and I kind of found out or realized that we cannot apply common terms such as volunteer, complicity, compliance, even like collaboration versus resistance, or colonizer versus colonizers. Those types of simple binaries do not function well to approach these issues historically. For instance, my own research is about ethnic Koreans in Manchuria, and as Professor Yoon has mentioned before, Korea was annexed in 1910 by the Japanese Empire, and Manchuria was colonized, or the Manchukuo commonly known as the puppet state of Manchukuo by the Japanese imperialism in 1931. So there was this 20 years gap between colonization of Korea and colonization of Manchuria. And some Koreans who entered Manchuria were considered as formerly colonized Japanese imperial subjects by native Chinese. And actually some Japanese also wanted to use these Koreans as agents of imperial expansion in Manchuria as well. So yeah, in that case, what do we mean by being Korean, Chinese, or Japanese? In this case, imperialism makes identity so much complicated, so we cannot just say that Koreans were colonized or were colonizers either, or that kind of binary does not seem to make sense. And as I was thinking about this complexity of colonial subjectivity and moved on to look at my dissertation bag, I realized that still there is power differential between being a Korean and being a Japanese in the Manchurian setting as well, in the imperial context. It's ethnicity is was what they argued to use to categorize these different groups of people. Yet we can use race. I think it's a euphemistic word to understand different groups of people, racially distinguished groups of people with ethnicity in the Japanese imperial case. So yeah, what would that kind of research project would mean? And that was kind of the question I was bothered with throughout this debate. And yeah, and as the historical revisionists were arguing that these Koreans were the Korean recruiters of comfort women were ethnically Korean and they were volunteering or willingly selling their women or to make money and etc. I thought it's really important to put emphasis on the power differential, as Dr. Zesty mentioned, that strategies where